Hello and welcome to Authentic You. We are here, season 2. Guys, second season, this makes us like professionals. Like, we're another level of...
we really are.
My kids don't think I'm cool, but I feel like this kind of makes us cool. Actually, no.
We think you're cool.
Oh my gosh, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. I am here with my wonderful co-hosts. I have Erica Myberg.
Hello, everyone.
The true South African turned American, still working on stuff. And Deborah Giles. So, once again, if you want to recognize our voices, this is me. I think I sound like a man when I re-listen to myself. Deborah I think you sound great.
Well, I have a twin, so we have very much a distinct voice. So It is, I would say, very California, very American accent.
And then Erica's easy because she has an accent.
I sound like I sound. I have no accent. You guys are the ones who have an accent.
Erica, where do you live?
Yes.
I have to remind her. She tries to say this stuff to me. You are in America.
That's
Put
right.
on the American flag and go run around. That's what we do. All right? American through and through. It's what we do. Anyway, we have a wonderful guest with us, Michael Brodeur, and you guys are going to hear more about him later. But, well, you can say hello so they know your voice.
Hi, everybody. I am here, and I'm, I guess, the first male on this podcast,
that's
which
right.
gives me a great place of seniority and influence. So praise God.
It actually does speak because we are a women's podcast.
Yes.
So we're not going to let just any man on here. Number one, we respect you, but you're actually nice.
Yes.
You know, not that men are mean, but
We are very biblical. We're going to allow the man to preach and teach.
Hallelujah.
And we will sit silent, mostly. Not you, though. You cannot be silent.
I know I can't. I can't. Anyway, it's an honor to have you, Michael, and we're very excited for what you're going to share. But we know this is being released in the fall, but for us, it's summer. And Deborah's son is maybe one of my most favorite people. The stories Deborah has about him bring me way too much joy. So, Deborah, tell us about Wesley Summer.
So Wesley is my youngest. We're not supposed to give Enneagrams, but if you have a child that is probably Enneagram 7, he wants to have fun. He is very curious. He will interrogate and ask questions 24/7. And so we were in a hotel and we were there a couple nights and we went into the pool area and there was a hot tub there and there were people in the hot tub.
Sorry,
and
it's making me
you're
giggle
always
already.
wondering, what is Wesley going to ask the person or the people who are in the hot tub? So the first day we get in there and he says to a group of people that are sitting there, he says, I weigh, and he says what he weighs. And then he says, what do you guys weigh? And you could see the stunned look on their face, like, I'm not going to tell you what I weigh. The second night, so I'm like, Wesley, honey, that is an inappropriate. You cannot ask people what they weigh. Like, that's just not appropriate. So the second day we go in, and again, there are people in the hot tub, and this time they are of probably Asian descent, and they're sitting there in a group talking, and he gets in the hot tub, and he immediately asks, do any of you guys speak English? Which I was like, Wesley, we are in America. You don't need to know if kids speak, or if they speak English. And then I finally said to him, Wesley, you have to stop. Like, you cannot ask questions. Like, this is just not appropriate. In fact, we had friends that we were going on a boat with, and we said to him, because he always wants to ask people if they know Jesus. Like, do you know Jesus? You know, are you a Christian? And so we were going with a couple of work colleagues that we knew did not know the Lord, and we were just going to know them. And so we said to him, we were in the car on our way to get on the boat, and we said to him, Wesley, we love you, but we do not need you to ask if they know Jesus. Like, please do not ask that. We are loving on them. One day we will lead them to the Lord, but right now don't ask. And he immediately says to me, well, who's going to ask then? Like, if I'm not asking, do you know Jesus? Who's going to ask? Wow. So he's a very curious guy, and we have to hold him back. We're always like, oh, here we go. What are you going to say? And what are you going to embarrass me on? Because my other kids are very low key. They will not, they're more introverted, and we are always just holding on for dear life. Anyone else have? I'm sure many of you on here have one of those kids, and you just can't control them. You wish you could. You wish you could muzzle them, but there's no way to do that.
You know I do. You know I do. My favorite, my girl is old.
Yeah.
I mean, she's old, and she thinks somehow it's funny and like a compliment. She calls everybody a slut.
Oh.
And like, she's funny. She's like, come on, Mom. Yeah, you're such a slut. I'm all, I just remember she did it to Erica because, Erica's like an aunt.
Right.
And Erica's kids looked
Like,
and we're
what is Mom
no.
going
you
to
just
do?
called my mom a slut.
Yes. Mom takes words serious.
And Raya's like,
I know.
I'm all, that's a compliment. That means like you're cool or you're her buddy. I don't know. That means like, come on, slut. Like they're best friends or something. And it's like, right, you can't say that. Like, you can't say that to
so
grown
crazy.
people that they're sluts. Like, they don't.
We're a different generation.
Our generation, that's not kind.
The only version that we know of that is the one in the Bible. She almost died when they talk about that. Okay, that's how serious that word is.
Yes.
Not to Raya.
Michael agrees with me.
Yeah.
So
No, poor strangers that meet
Yes.
Raya without me there to go, I've tried to tell her not to say that, but she thinks you're her best friend. So good luck. Good luck.
Yes.
Anyway, Michael is a man of some of the best stories you guys will ever hear. He was a former hippie turned pastor. One of Banning's favorite things that he likes to talk about is, so we have in our backyard a falconer, who lives behind a falconer? There's literally a guy raising a hawk. Well, Banning's talking to Michael about it, and he's like, yeah, I lived with a whole bunch in the gay community, but they were also falconers. We were like, and that's Michael summed up.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. He was a pastor forever, but that part is true. But he was a pastor. He co-founded many ministries. I don't even know all of them. I met you when you were pastoring a vineyard church in San Francisco.
Yeah.
He's been with us for a long time. Banning goes to him for wisdom and help on a lot of issues. And we now have the honor of him being on staff with us. So now we all go to him for wisdom on issues. Sometimes I'll sit down and he's got so much history on running programs in churches that he'll be like, well, what if you did this, this, and this? And I'm like, okay, well, could we break it down to a simpler step of like, how do I lead these 3 people, Michael?
Yes.
And he's like, oh, yeah, that's good. But you've done so much great stuff. So it's an amazing gift to have you in our midst. And the biggest thing I've been talking to him about is church wounds.
Yeah.
And how do we do this? For me, I am looking at it obviously as a leader because there's so much in the news of people falling, people doing stuff wrong. And it's so easy to jump on like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And then all of a sudden I'm like, it's humbling because you're like, hey, we're all basically one step away from making a massive mistake. Nobody's perfect. But I'm also watching going, how do we do this? One of the things we want to talk about, though, is we're talking to real people. We're not usually talking to leaders in the church.
Right.
So as just a member of a church, most of us have been hurt by something. How do you walk this out?
Well,
Answer it. Fix it for us all,
right.
Michael.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I was a pastor in San Francisco for 33 years. My first 7 years, I was in training with a ministry that believed in a thing called shepherding.
Oh.
And they've been accused a lot of church hurt, causing church wounds. And I had my share of those wounds, you know, number one. Number two is when I entered the vineyard, it was a very different season. That was in the mid-'80s. We pastored in a vineyard for 15 years and just, you know, was a wonderful season where we were able to grow a large church in San Francisco at a time when the biggest church was about 150. Ours grew to more than 1,000. And it was just an amazing season of signs and wonders, beautiful breakthroughs. But we also went through some church hurt issues. One of my key leaders got hurt by me, and he ultimately went ballistic against me. I got wounded by him, and our whole church was wounded. So anyway, I'm a veteran of church wars, and I've been on both sides of the equation. I've been the hurt one. I've been the herder, at least according to some. And I don't know if there's a once and for all solution to this issue. Because if you look carefully in Scripture at Jesus had a group of 12 guys that were competing with one another, comparing themselves to one another. They were fighting with one another about who was best on the night that Jesus was betrayed. I mean, if you really want to get technical, I mean, they were some pretty damaged folk.
Wow.
Okay, and then you go, fast forward into Paul and Barnabas having a great disagreement and having to deal with that. I mean, literally, church hurt is normal. And I think that's the first foundation we need to lay, is that you gather a bunch of imperfect people together and you're going to have some imperfect results.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the biggest challenges of leadership in any context is that leadership is all about adjusting expectations.
Wow.
And if you have an expectation of a utopian reality that is just going to be flawless in every sense, then you're probably going to be subject to a lot of pain in your life.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, your expectation of perfection is going to be betrayed by 1,000 imperfect people. So anyway, that's probably a good place to start.
Yes, that's really good. It actually is so enlightening to me, even though you know it, but to hear the disciples were regular damaged men
Yes.
who were fighting. I'm like, we can kind of make them not like us.
Right.
Like somehow they're better. And so to even hear that, you're like, you're right.
A Photoshop picture of history, but nope.
Yeah, they fought. They were mad at each other. They hurt each other's feelings. They offended each other.
So, obviously in this cancel culture and kind of, being offended and wanting to quickly move on, I think there's a tendency sometimes to not know what to do. Like, do I just leave? If I'm offended by leadership, do I stick around and almost, I hate to say it this way, but talk to other people about it and kind of see if they agree with me and, build my case? Or do I just shut up and be quiet and just live in some hurt and pain? What does it look like for people who just feel like they don't know what to do with it? They're just kind of paralyzed with it and they're simmering on it, but they just don't know what to do.
And unfortunately, that whole dynamic does literally eat like a cancer into the underpinnings of the church and will literally rob your church of momentum. It'll rob your church of sense of God's presence and power. And so we have to deal with it. And I think we have to deal with it in the context of our bigger culture, because we live in a culture where unfortunately, there is this whole quest for a safe space, that nobody should be offended, that ultimately even if we go to the Me Too issue, that you always believe the victim, even though the victim may be only telling half the story or their perspective on the story. There's a bunch of these dynamics that have emerged over the last 10 years that have really caused a little bit of an unspoken crisis in the church. How do we deal with the fact? And then how do you deal with it in a way where you're not gaslighting, using a popular term, people to get them to shut up? In fact, I was accused of that one time where one of my dear friends said, "Michael, the problem with you is when I come to you with a complaint, you are always like the Jedi saying, 'These are not the droids you're looking for.'" It's like I was a master at being able to deflect and to refocus people in a different direction, which ultimately is really counterculture right now. You have to be able to stop. You have to be able to hear the heart of the person who's hurting if you want to actually come through to a place of resolution and a healthy culture. And so again, even though we'd like to be able to say, "Oh, well, shove it," or you just deal with it before the Lord. In fact, I don't think we have the liberty to do that anymore. I think we have to be able to be sensitive to this issue because it is endemic in our culture. It's like, okay, the victim needs to be heard.
Wow.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're right or wrong, regardless of whether their perceptions are real or not.
This would be a question I would have for like as a person in the church, who do they go to? I feel like sometimes they don't know who to talk to about their hurt. And so it just festers, or it becomes like that cancer because they're talking to their friends because they don't know where to go. So where do they go?
Well, I think, again, Matthew 18 is the perfect framework for the perfect protocol for processing pain in the body of Christ. Okay, and he talks specifically about offense. It's not so much talking about, let's say, if a pastor commits adultery or something like that, although those things are real. They do happen in our culture, and we need to be aware of them. And there needs to be some protocol for resolving that, especially if you've been victimized to whatever extent by that situation. Okay, but going back to just general offense, Pastor, you said something to me that really hurt my feelings, or peer-to-peer offense, which is something that happens all the time that causes people to think, well, I can no longer go back to church at that church because this home group leader hurt my feelings.
Right.
Okay, so the protocol is if you're offended, you go to the person who offended you first. Okay. Now that's a problem if you're a lead pastor and you said something offensive, because you're going to have a whole long line of people that will be coming to you. Do you even have the time for that? Okay. But unfortunately, I think as lead pastors, we have to be able to say, you know what, this is my responsibility as a believer, that if I've hurt somebody, even if it was unintentional, I need to hear their heart. Okay, number one. Number two is then if they won't hear you, if you don't feel resolved, then you go and bring somebody else. And generally, it's not somebody who will be vulnerable to your complaint and share your complaint and take up your offense. It's somebody who has the maturity to process it with you. Okay, the third thing it says in that protocol is that we need to tell it to the church. If you're not heard in number one, not heard in number two, then you tell it to the church. But the word ecclesia needs to be understood clearly. It's not about standing up on a Sunday morning and say, pastor hurt me, or this home group leader hurt me, or this person that was, organizing this event hurt me. It's really about going to the proper authorities in the church. Okay, the word ecclesia was a word that was used to define the elders that sat in the city gates and legislated on behalf of the well-being of the... So again, it's not just anybody, or it's not just everybody. It's the specific people who have governmental authority within the church to really help resolve a conflict if it emerges.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can we backtrack even more? Because that to me feels like, we walk into church and say peer-to-peer. Somebody, they ignored me. They're not saying hi, and I am offended by that.
Yes.
And I somehow don't take care of that in my heart and let it fester. So that to me obviously has the potential to grow into something ugly over time. You're like, these people at this church don't care for you. They don't even say hi or talk to you. How do I deal with that? Because I'm not necessarily, for us from the outside, it's pretty clear. Hey, you got your feelings hurt and you didn't forgive or dealt with it. But now it's this big black thing.
Right.
And now you want to go do the steps that you just talked about, even though it started with that person was actually in a conversation, didn't see you, didn't hear you. So on that very grassroots level, because I think that's where, that's humanity. We get our feelings hurt. And in that moment, we've talked about it so much here. We do know, well, that's my responsibility right there to take care of my own inner world and figure out what was that? Why did it push a button in me? You tend to your own garden and you forgive. Let's talk about forgiveness because that's something that could just die down right there and causes me, well, next Sunday I come back and I am going to put myself out there versus, like you say, you actually mentioned, and we can talk about it a little bit, some people just have a propensity towards, I'm going to step into the doors of this church and we have a checklist.
Right.
From this perspective, I am going to judge this Sunday.
Yeah.
Who says hi? And that's what we want to go after. How do we go to church and push past that and actually grow community with the understanding that we're all going to be imperfect until we see Jesus one day. And he places a real big importance and value on church. So it's kind of, if I can dial it a little bit on that grassroots level, how do we go to church, be offended, deal with it, and stay and love the people without we're going to do those 3 steps that, get to that point. Doesn't make sense?
Yeah.
So Michael, solve it for us.
Yeah. Well, the point before those 3 steps is the issue of processing your pain in the presence of God.
Right.
Okay, we're right now in the middle of a summer of discipleship in our church. This week, I'm going to be actually teaching and talking about what are the aspects of maturity that every single believer needs to embrace. Maturity is defined in a number of different ways. Okay, maturity is no longer being the center of your universe. That's a big one. Most people are the center of their solar system, and Jesus is one of the planets rotating around them. But the fact is that I need to make Jesus the sun in my solar system. Or, as we used to say, he needs to sit on the throne of my life. And unless he's your Lord, he really can't be your Savior in every circumstance. And so that's the first step. Okay, the second step is that I need to know how to give up present pleasure for long-term gain.
Wow.
I mean, the ability to suspend immediate gratification. I demand, to be accepted and loved in this church my first day I darken the door of the church.
Right.
Or I'm going to hold a vendetta against this church. No, you can't go there. You have to be able to take responsibility for your own heart and your own issues. The third thing, though, I fully believe earmarks maturity is the ability to process pain in the presence of God and use it as a tool of growth, not a tool of victimization. And unfortunately, we live in a culture of victimization where everybody feels not just the right, but the responsibility to be a victim of life.
Wow.
And unfortunately, to the extent that they do that is the extent to which they never can actually grow. And so processing your pain initially, okay, I came to church, nobody hung out with me, or nobody really received me, or, I had a conversation with somebody, but they were always looking beyond me to see who was cooler than I was so they could go hang out with them. Anyway, we've all had that experience. Okay. So what I need to do then is I need to process in such a way that actually says, okay, Father, why am I here? Why have you brought me here? This is an imperfect group of people, and I should have expected that from the start. I know I have a propensity to be easily offended by rejection or by abandonment or by, a lack of acknowledgement. Okay, how do I position my heart in this situation to use this church as a launching pad for my growth?
Yes.
And not
So
to just be
good.
in that place of, in other words, we have a personal responsibility because we're not here to do our own thing. We're not here to get our needs met. And again, that's the problem with current Christian culture is that we broadcast our churches as a consumer product.
Yeah.
Come to our church and we will meet your need. You will never be more loved than you will be here. You'll never be more cared for. You're never going to have, as good a Bible teaching. You're never going to experience the presence of God as fully as in our worship set.
Right.
It's like, our screen, our LED screen is the best in the, it's like,
Wow.
come on, you guys. It's like, get your burger your way,
Yeah.
the Burger King reality.
Yeah.
It's like, see, we have set ourselves up to create a culture of disappointment.
Yeah. The exact problem is, how do I come to church still and set my heart on growth while culture is screaming exactly the opposite, like what you feel and what you think is your truth.
Yes.
And you get to make choices based on that. And then Jesus is building his church.
Right.
And we want to be a part of it. And how do I be a member of that? And the great honor and privilege of being chosen to be a part. And anyway, I'm like, that is, imagine if we have churches where everybody comes with that attitude.
Right. Well, that's what Jesus invited them to.
Yeah.
Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. He didn't say, come to me and I will heal all your wounds and make you the happiest person on the earth.
Yeah.
I mean, there was literally a call to discipleship in the ministry of Jesus. And this is something interesting because about 12 years ago, I started coaching churches professionally. I mean, that's what I do around the earth and working with pastors, and especially in the light of the, quote, father heart teaching that we have, which I love, and it's a very important message for me personally. But in the light of the father heart teaching, I'll go to pastors and say, well, what are you building? Well, we're building a family. And I'll say, well, how do you define family? And they'll say something like this: family is a safe place to belong. And I'll say, well, yeah, if you're 6 months old.
Right.
I mean, my wife and I had 7
That's so
children.
good.
It's like,
Yeah.
6 months old or up to 2 years old. Family was always just about identity. It's about love. It's about changing diapers. It's about unconditional service to somebody that is absolutely needy. Okay, that's fine. There's a
Yeah.
season that is the right aspect of
Yes.
church. But ultimately, if church is only a safe place to belong, and you've been a Christian for 20 years,
Right.
chances are you're sitting in my basement playing video games in your underwear.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like we say, well, that's funny, but the fact is that I was at a church, about maybe 3 weeks ago, asked everybody in the church, how many years have you been a Christian? The church is 50 members. 3/4 of the hands went up. I've been a Christian for more than 20 years.
Wow.
Okay. You go home from church. Wow, Pastor, that was a great message. Playing your video,
Yeah.
church reality, rather than saying, wait a minute, church belongs to me. I'm an owner of this
Right.
thing. I need to step up. I need to do my part to bring us forward into the, anyway. So
good.
But here's
Wow.
the issue is, how do we shift? Well, there's 3 kinds of churches. One is what I call fantasy church, where we just go through the motions every week. And, it's basically consumer church. But then, in response to that, some people build what I call factory church. But the problem with factory church, even though you're going after the right outcome, you're doing it on the wrong foundation. Because factory church says this: as a pastor, my vision is so great, my love for the city is so powerful, my anointing is so awesome, that God brought all of you here to help me fulfill my vision.
Wow.
Okay. In fact, the real answer is family church. How do we do church really as a family that isn't just about belonging, but family is about becoming? In other words, with 7 kids, I had to create a pathway for each one of them to become exactly who the Lord Jesus had called them to be, and to prepare them for that. And preparation is painful.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And if we don't tell people that, hey,
Yeah.
being part of this church is not going to always be easy.
Yeah.
But it will be good if you
Yes.
allow the Lord to use the process to transform you. If you allow yourself the permission to process your pain before Jesus, you can actually capitalize on even the worst experience in this church to
Absolutely.
become
Yes.
the person that God's
Yes.
called you to be.
Yes.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I even think when you say church is supposed to be family, you think of all the family wounding people
Yes,
have, and
yes.
so people almost go, "I don't want it to be family." Like I have
Exactly.
run from my family.
Yeah.
Family represents pain, and so I think when we say we want to be family, it does almost in our mind shift to go, well, then I'm a part, right? I'm not an observer. I have to participate if I want to be connected to my family, and I have to learn to belong, and I have to find my own identity
Yes.
within my family as well.
Right.
So I'm not looking for them to give me identity. I've got to find it, and I have to welcome people in like a family would to their own home. So I think it
Yes.
makes it really, it's very easy for us to sit back and go, well, they haven't done this for me. They haven't helped me. Like, it's easy to accuse or assume or have all this expectation when it's not your family.
Right.
But the minute
Exactly.
that you embrace and go, this is my family.
Yeah.
I am whatever church you are. This church is me and I am them and I am the church, whatever God, I am the church of Christ. But
Right.
it does create a responsibility that asks us to grow up
Yeah.
a little bit and to show up a little bit
Right.
more as well.
Yes.
So I do love that. It is, I think, family can be a painful
Complex
topic.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we have to look at God's overall purposes. Family is the model of heaven for life, for growth, for everything. And if you look back to the original family, Adam and Eve, if you look back to the, Cain and Abel, I mean, we're looking at family, again, family, we look through this romantic lens, but the fact is family is a painful, let's call it a crucible in which all of us are incubated into life.
Wow.
And to the extent that we want to distance ourselves or hold offense against family is to the extent to which we actually paralyze ourselves. We actually handicap ourselves for real life. Once you can process your family in a way that allows you to love them, forgive them, but also to be able to appreciate even in their brokenness, that something real happened in my life that ultimately, I'm not talking about extreme abuse.
Right.
I'm just talking about normal family garbage.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? It's like,
Yeah.
now extreme abuse is a different animal and we need to cut that away always. However, most of what we call abuse was really just normal family dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And the same thing in the church. In other words, so factory exists for the benefit of the owner. And that's where a lot of abuse comes from.
Wow.
That's
is because the system is not geared, but family exists for the benefit of the next generation.
Yes.
And so if we
good.
build church with that in mind, that ultimately the highest purpose of any church is to be a destiny incubator for every member.
Yeah.
And that part of that is the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable. Part of that's the fact that you will be hurt. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
In this world, you will have tribulation. Be of good cheer. I've overcome the world.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of the call to discipleship. Anyway.
Yeah, and that you will be challenged, that
Yeah.
you will be uncomfortable, that you
Yes.
will not be able to show up at church and simply feel good about yourself and
Yeah.
leave, but that church really is a place where you can grow and you can be prepared for
Right.
life.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I mean, you and I've laughed a lot about our kids, and as they're growing up, my kids would have, you can see kind of they question, do I even really belong in this family? Because I'm like this and everybody else is like that.
Yeah.
And I've just always told the kids, well, God chose this family for you. And what we're doing here together is practicing.
Right.
We are practicing. This is the bestest place that you're ever going to have to practice love and forgiveness towards your sibling, or how do I speak louder or listen more, as you say, as we launch them, get them ready to launch them into the wide world where God has a purpose and a destiny. He has things for us to do. And so if we can, and lots of us do it naturally in our families, but there's this disconnect. We don't translate that to the family of God, which is, this is a place where we come and practice.
And that is the fallacy of church hopping.
There you
Okay.
go. Yes.
Is that ultimately, you can, it's like, polyamory or something. I mean, you can have, sort of serial monogamy in the church, but until you marry a church, you're not going to find the transformational teeth that will help you become more like Jesus. In other words, if you're going from romance to romance, which a lot of people do that. In fact, there's very little real conversion growth in the church today. Most of the church growth is transfer growth. People hopping from one church to another to get the better burger, and they'll go into a love affair with that church for the first 6 months or the first 18 months, and then they'll start to see the dark underbelly, and then they'll become critical, and then they'll hop to the next church. Well, that's not Christianity. I'm sorry. Like, you cannot ultimately become the glorious expression of Jesus that you're called to be if you don't go through the challenges of embracing each other in the midst of imperfection.
As a leader, that's helpful to hear.
Yeah.
Because I think, Banning and I are very different leaders. He's visionary, so he can, not that he's okay that people are uncomfortable or whatever, but I don't love that people get hurt.
Yeah.
But then the more you lead, the more people get hurt.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, how do I do this?
Wow.
I'm doing my best, but I'm an imperfect leader. I'm an imperfect person.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing my best. There's nothing in me that would ever intentionally hurt somebody.
Right.
Yet I hurt people.
Yeah.
And so it's just helpful to hear, the process, the responsibility on people. Because as a leader, I can feel like, oh my gosh, it's my responsibility to grow them. It's my responsibility to help fix this broken spot in them.
And make them happy,
Yes, and keep them and then it's like, oh wait, no, it's their responsibility. And of course, own where we hurt them, but it's not
Exactly.
my job to get them there.
Yeah.
And that's just actually very helpful because it is hard to know you've hurt somebody.
That's so right.
And yeah.
And that's really where I think that we need to have, especially in our current culture, there has to be a process by which every one of us, as leaders, knowing that we will hurt others, or as just church members, we're going to do and say things that will unintentionally hurt others, that we need to be able to have a process by which we can resolve things. And here's kind of a couple practical thoughts there. The first one is, if somebody comes to you, and I've had this not a million, but, probably at least several hundred times, people coming to me and say, 2 years ago, you said something that really hurt me. Okay. And I'll just say, oh, I'm sorry. What was it? Please talk to me. So the first step is always acknowledge somebody. Even if you know that their pain is really more about them than it is about you, please take the time to look them in the eye and acknowledge the fact that their pain is real, even if it's only perceived and not actual.
Oh, that's so good. And so hard.
It's so hard to do.
So hard.
But you just got to take a breath and listen.
Okay.
And that's the first step of this entire process, is acknowledge that regardless of whether it's actual or imagined, it's real to them, and I need to hear this.
Yeah.
Okay, the second thing is to really look for any place you could admit to wrongdoing. If I failed either creating a culture that allowed this to happen, or I failed in something I said that was insensitive, or something I raised up this leader who wasn't fully all there and they hurt you. Okay, I acknowledge that. Please forgive me. I will do better in the coming season. Okay, that's the next step, is admit and then apologize. Those 3 A's, acknowledge, admit, and apologize. Like, hey, I'm so sorry that happened. Can you please forgive me? And sometimes they'll say, yes, I forgive you. And then they'll come back with the same offense 2 weeks later. And you have to say, wait a minute. Last time we talked about this, we prayed and you forgave me. Why are you bringing it up again?
Wow.
That's so good.
How can I help you to fully resolve this so that you understand true forgiveness is canceling the debt? Okay. So that issue, you have to bring people to closure in the apology process. Okay, if we don't do that, then they're going to just have this lingering little seed of offense that's going to keep rearing its head over the next season. Okay, try to bring them, and then I don't think it's wrong to challenge them. Say, hey, you forgave me. Was that forgiveness incomplete? Was it, how can I help you to fully put this and bury this issue? Okay, then the next thing is you need to advise them. How can I help you now process this in the future? And this is, the fourth A is advise them, like, hey, you know what? I'm so sorry that this happened. However, how can I help you now to process this in a correct way? Okay. And then finally, you need to be able to really, truly assist them. Because people don't know how to deal with pain. They don't know how to deal with betrayal. They don't know how to deal with disacknowledgement. How can I now assist you? And this is the key to disciple making, is that we need to be able to enter the relationship like a coach, not like a boss.
That's right.
Or not even like a parent, really. Shut up and deal with it, child. No. We need to be able to actually say, okay, I'm here to help you process life. How can I help you now to put things where they belong in your heart so you can move forward into the fullness of who God's called you to be?
I love that, because I think sometimes we get to I've heard you, I'm sorry, and then we stop there.
Right.
And then everyone hugs and cries it out, and it's over, but we don't move into coaching them or pastoring them or discipling them into steps to not let it happen again or to work through it. I think that is the difference of a friend compared to a pastor and a leader, is that you are doing the last 3 steps, which I don't think is always happens. I think we get to that second step of, connecting and responding and apologizing, and then we walk away and we wonder why it comes back, and we haven't really, I want to say, coach them through it.
Absolutely.
To walk them through to the other side.
Well, I just saw, Simone Biles on the balance beam. I mean, just like the most outrageously incredible performance you ever. Did she get there by herself? Absolutely not. She had a coach. And the fact that you're bringing up coaching in this situation is so important, because, but she had to give permission to the coach to push her beyond her natural limits.
Yes.
Well said.
And so again, that's part of the discipleship culture that we want to create, is the permission. What I say to people when I'm trying to, coach them or entering into a coaching relationship is, well, tell me what you want to win. Because if you want to win the school championship, I can coach you this much. If you want to win the city, I can get you a little further. But if you want to win the Olympics, you're going to have to engage at a level that is different. You're going to have to deny yourself at a level that's much higher than just winning the school championship. Okay. But if you want that, if you want to go for the gold, I'm your coach. I will help you, but I need permission.
Oh, that's
because
good.
I'm not going to impose myself. I'm not going to manipulate you. I'm not going to abuse you. But I will push you to your limits depending on the goal that you want to win. And that's really what the discipleship covenant exists somewhere in that realm.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily saying, everybody, you're stuck in the church that you are forever.
No, for sure.
We're also saying that there are healthy churches out there and churches that are not so
Less
healthy.
yeah.
And that we do get to leave in a healthy and mature way. So this is what I want to know. If you can shortly, if you can, how does a healthy church look? How does a church look that is not healthy? And how do you leave or recognize something that's not healthy and walk it out, of course, with the Lord, honoring to get to a place where it's healthy? Because I would feel if I was in a church that, there's maybe a lot of manipulation, we don't know, it just feels yucky. Now I'm stuck because I just have to forgive. And I mean, maybe I'm talking from personal experience too, like very, very stuck, even though God worked it out because we insisted, Lord, work with us, start with us. And he worked it all out. It was part of our process actually to get to Bethel and Reading. Yeah. But what is a good picture of a healthy one and not healthy one?
Sure.
And can I leave with the Lord and get to a place that's healthy?
Absolutely. And I've had to leave several situations at different times for different reasons. So again, I'm not opposed to that at all, but we have to understand that every church and every pastor is just an under shepherd of the true pastor and bishop of our souls, which is Jesus.
Yes.
He is the over pastor. We are just under pastors in a sense. We're sub pastors. And so ultimately, the Bible says that he places us in the body as it pleases him. And so there are realities, and this is where it's, the first church I was part of, I loved the church, I was trained in the church, I became one of the co-leaders of the church, but eventually the church became limiting to me in terms of my calling. A long story, I can't go into it, but what happened was, even though I was, in a sense, put into a position that was uncomfortable for me at the church, I resolved not to leave the church until God gave me permission. So I was removed from being one of the preaching pastors to taking over the nursery. Just to deal with an area of pride in my life, okay? And I embraced that, and I did it for 6 months before one morning I woke up and the Lord said, now you have my permission. You passed the test. Okay. In other words, can I let Jesus be the Lord of the church that I go to? And can I submit to him within the decision-making process of where I'm going to go to church and how I'm going to go to church? Okay, then I went to the Vineyard, which I found to be a much more healthy environment. However, it also had its own weaknesses. Okay, after the Vineyard, I ended up actually having to step away from the Vineyard after John Wimber died because the direction it was going was contrary to what the Lord had spoken to me. But I still stayed in there for at least another year in that deliberating process until the Lord gave me permission. Like, in other words, I didn't want to shortcut God. I didn't want to circumvent his work in my life in order to go to a place I felt more comfortable. Then I ended up at Bethel. Bethel was a wonderful experience. However, it wasn't the perfect church. So again, I went through some challenges there as well, and but it was awesome. And then finally, obviously, being here at Jesus Culture, I would say Jesus Culture is the perfect church.
There you go. Well done.
But I'm still in my romance period, however.
It is, of course.
No, but you understand. So this is what we're after. How do we follow Jesus? I mean, it's all about Jesus.
Yeah.
And if Jesus says, stay in an uncomfortable situation, do I have the grace? Can I apprehend the grace to stay until his work in me is done in that particular circumstance
so good.
before I move on to what I believe are greener pastures?
No, that is good. That is good because I love that staying as long as He's doing that work in me, and until He is done,
Right.
and then we can move. That's beautiful. I mean, that also prevents church hopping, because
Yes.
that we didn't want to do either. But
Exactly. But you don't want to also sign in blood and resign your life to
No.
an unfruitful dynamic that's going to
Absolutely.
actually be just a point of pain in your life that doesn't
Yeah.
have redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even being a pastor's kid, I think one of the things that I would say in moving on from a church is just don't stab them in the back on the way
Yes.
out. You know, if you
Exactly.
had
Oh,
a
yeah.
a bad experience, be private about it. You don't
Yeah.
need to go tell all your friends and family and everyone around you. You know, it was a season you were in and God moved you on, but use some maturity in that, because I
Yes.
think sometimes we want to
Yes.
prove why we've made a decision. And, you know, unless it's abusive, there's just no point in, you know, trying to muddle people's expectations or thoughts of a church if God's just called you on.
And
Yeah.
the big question there is, you know, if you feel like, no, I was abused there, I have to correct this, I have to go public. You know what? I had a conversation with somebody who has a public profile who was actually telling me he's about to go public on another church. And I just said, well, is this your jurisdiction? In other words, has God authorized you to be the corrector of this situation? If not, then please do not go in that direction. If you think God has given you that, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
Because God doesn't take it easily when we go against the anointed.
absolutely.
You know, David and Saul had David personified what you're talking about, that noble appreciation for somebody who was an absolutely imperfect, broken leader.
Yes.
Was horribly abusive to the point of death.
Yeah.
And yet David continued to honor him even though he fully was not blind to the imperfection of his leader.
So good. Well, Michael, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I hope this was encouraging for you, challenging. I mean, I think there's so much of the church, exactly what you described. They are still the center, not so much of the church, but the young Christians, that they are the center of the universe, and Jesus is just rotating around them.
Yeah.
You know, I'm the parent of young adults, so most of them are
We
still
know what
in that
how
phase
that
of
looks,
life.
yes.
Yeah.
I remember when I was
Parenting
in that
never
phase
stops.
of life. Yeah. Of like, wow, I am the center of the universe, and
Yes.
I'm pretty wonderful. Jesus, you have that small part. Way to keep rotating with everybody else. That's wonderful. So I get it, and it's not a judgment, but it's like, we can easily get stuck there. That was a good, we need to grow up. That's
Yes.
good. We appreciate you. I feel like church is going to come into a good season again.
Yes.
A life
Yes.
season, you know. So, all right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think we might need a reoccurring Michael.
I think so too. Michael
Yes.
can come
Yes.
back.
Yes.
You passed
This
the test.
You passed the test, Michael.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.